Welcome each one of you to this feast webinar on Ecumenism of Blood in a Multicultural Context, a reflection on Nigeria's situation. You may all be aware that feast, or the Fellowship of Anglican Scholars of Theology, is a global platform for encounter between scholars, as well as exchange of current theological thinking and research. What FEAST seeks to do is to foster what we call academic solidarities through mutual mentoring and support. So we meet today as peers and as friends on a common journey in a spirit of mutual learning, where we build each other up in the vocation of doing theology both through words and in action. So in general, feast webinars are meant to offer us all an opportunity to deepen theological reflection on a theme of pressing importance. And what can be a more pressing theme than the issue of religious persecution and its implication for ecumenism in today's world? We are delighted to be joined by the Reverend Canon Dr Ishaya Anthony, and he'll be leading us in this webinar on the poignant theme of ecumenism of blood in a multicultural context, a reflection on Nigeria's situation. Canon Ishaya Anthony is Westminster Abbey's inaugural Commonwealth Theologian in residence. He's the Canon Theologian of the Diocese of Kwoi in Nigeria, as well as a postdoctoral research fellow at the Department of Religious Studies of the University of Johannesburg, and a research assistant in the Religion and Media Group at the Desmond Tutu Center for Religion and Social Justice in South Africa. He completed a joint PhD in Educational Science from the University of Ghent, Belgium, and a PhD in Theological Studies from the University of the Western Cape, South Africa, along with an MTH in Practical Theology from Stellenbosch University. He also completed his advanced master's degree in ecumenical studies from the Ecumenical Institute of the World Council of Churches in Beauvais, Switzerland. So we are really delighted that Canon Ishaya Anthony has agreed to speak to us. And more importantly, what I forgot to mention is that he was also a participant of the first in-person seminar of Feast, which took place in Sri Lanka last year. So it is really significant for us to be focusing today on the theme of ecumenism in a year which has significance for ecumenism, given that this is the 1700th anniversary of the First Ecumenical Council of Nicaea. However, the starting point for reflection on ecumenism today is the painful reality of persecution, which, according to Pope Francis, can provide a rallying point for Christian unity, and hence the theme Ecumenism of Blood, which is a phrase from Pope Francis. So what would be the shape of this ecumenism of blood in the Nigerian context, where both Christian and Muslim communities suffer violence, but also continue to dialogue for peaceful coexistence that respects and promotes the sacredness of life and religious freedom? To explore this, we now turn to our speaker, the Canon Ishaya Anthony. Over to you, Ishaya.
Dr. Peniel, thank you so much to you and the USPG team for giving me the privilege to be part of this Feast online conference in this capacity. I deeply appreciate your leadership and how, in one way or the other, we have been encountering ourselves in different academic and critical spaces. And it's wonderful to see colleagues from the Feast Conference at Sri Lanka, and also some of my colleagues from Nigeria spread across different parts of the globe. Thank you so much for finding time to be part of this conference. So what I intend to do today is to share some reflection from my ongoing research on the theme Ecumenism of Blood. And I will be speaking, like you've heard Peniel said, from the Nigerian context. Religious communities in Nigeria continue to face the challenges of living peacefully together despite their followers' biological, cultural, and social interconnectedness. Between Christians and Muslims, this tension is deeply embedded and exacerbated by their practice of evangelizing belief for spiritual and political interests. The spiritual interest is eschatological. It focuses on the quest to gain followers, teach, and prepare them for paradise. The political dimension centers on territorial expansion, access to economic privileges, and social political influence. It has increased on healthy competition, mutual suspicion, and ethnic rivalry, broadens the country's religious divide, and fuel religious persecution. Christians in Nigeria, especially in the northern and central region, experience persistent persecution in various levels and at various ways from different religious extremist groups, such as the Maitesine, Boko Haram, Heathers, Bandit, Islamic State of West Africa, and the current Lakurawa movement. It is difficult to accurately produce a credible statistics of Christians killed, tortured, men detained for their faith in Jesus Christ. However, their persecution transcends denominational boundaries and church affiliations. For instance, in a testimony after the 2011 Boko Haram attack in one of the states in Nigeria, Yobe State in the north, Idris Garba, the former chairman of the apex ecumenical body of the state, the Christian Association of Nigeria, explained, and I quote, "It was a direct attack against Christians. They asked, 'Are you a Christian or a Muslim?' If you said you are a Christian, they killed you. They were selective," end of quote. Garba's testimony resonates with the reality of Christian martyrdom, the willingness of the followers of Jesus Christ to die for their faith. It becomes a channel of inspiration, strength, and unity for the church, capturing the phrase of an early church father, Tertullian, who said, and I quote, "The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church," end of quote. Also, it echoes Pope Francis' concept of ecumenism of blood. However, it is essential to acknowledge that Muslims are also persecuted in Nigeria. Therefore, in Nigeria's multi-religious context, where Christians have established meaningful social relationships with members of other religions, what will the unity from the ecumenism of blood look like? To explore this question, I apply the idea of human dignity and Nonsum Khan's concept of neighbor love. So Nonsum Khan is a South Korean theologian who wrote a very beautiful piece called Cosmopolitan Public Theology. It was published in 2013, and she used this concept of neighbor love to argue on how to do theology or public theology within a cosmopolitan context. So How do I apply human dignity and neighbor love? Conceptual clarification. In Christianity, the foundation of human dignity emanates from the creation concept of imago Dei, humans created in the image of God. It is expressed, acknowledged, and appreciated in relationships. There's consensus among African theologians that not only are we made in the image of God, but we are also made to live in community. It is in a community that we manifest the image of God. Therefore, to express the dignity of persons is to uphold life sanctity, promote justice, respect religious diversity, and foster peaceful coexistence for the flourishing of God's creation. Regardless of religious beliefs, ethnicity, and what they have done or failed to do, every human deserves respect. With this understanding of human dignity, religious persecution becomes an indictment on Nigeria at various levels. On the level of government, its constitution and policy implementation on religious freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of association, and right to life shows that the ideal of human dignity and sanctity of life is not seriously respected, protected, and promoted. It portrays the sluggishness of deep national orientation that deliberately and systematically teaches citizens to embrace the joy and navigate the challenges of living together in a multicultural, beautifully diverse country. On educational level system, it exposes the deficiency of a robust curriculum for religious literacy. On the level of religion, particularly Islam and Christianity, it exposes the deficit in interpreting sacred scriptures that amplify human dignity, responsibility, and mutual accountability to one's neighbor and creation. On the individual level, it exposes the neglect of life-affirming values of relationship, holding oneself, religious institutions, and the government accountable for sustainable justice, stability, and national flourishing. This calls us to embody and express a genuine love for God, which translates to love for one's neighbor, resonating with Nansum Khan's concept of neighbor love. Khan states that neighbor love emanates from Jesus's radical and almost impossible, I quote, commandment to love one's neighbor and enemy as oneself, end of quote. Jesus Christ embodied, exemplified, and taught neighbor love through his life and ministry. Applying the biblical story of the Last Judgment, applying the biblical story of the Last Judgment in Matthew 25, 31 to 46, Khan argues that the standard by which the sheep are separated from the goats is not based on religious affiliation or doctrinal belief and confession. Instead, it is based on the practice of what she called neighbor-enemy love. Hence, Khan posited, and I quote, one of the significant theological tasks today is to foster the recognition and knowing of the existence of various neighbors, end of quote. The recognition and knowing are predicted on the following reason. Number one, neighbors are often unwelcome and unlikable because their lifestyle, ideology, and circumstances do not align with ours. Secondly, recognizing and knowing one's neighbor require a deep social, political, religious sensitivity and awareness. For Christians, this comes through an intentional mind-changing submission and embracing of God's love as epitomized and expressed in Jesus Christ. Thirdly, not knowing or being ignorant cannot be an excuse for not taking responsibility of the neighbor. And fourthly, Loving one's neighbor is inseparable from loving God through Jesus Christ. It is an act of worship to God, regardless of differences or conflict. Therefore, human dignity and neighbor love reminds humanity of its roots and responsibility. Both concepts emphasize solidarity, the core of social coexistence and ecumenism in a multicultural and multi-religious context. Ecumenism of blood, an offshoot of ecumenical theology. In searching for contemporary and critical ways to reflect theologically on ecumenism, Pope Francis built on the Christian theology of martyrdom to introduce the term ecumenism of blood. It refers to the idea that Christians persecuted and martyred for their faith, regardless of their denomination affiliations and ecclesiastical differences, are united in their ultimate sacrifice. Their death become a rallying point for Christian unity. Responding to a media interview in December 2013 on the priority of ecumenism, Pope Francis stated, and I quote, "Ecumenism is a priority. Today, there is an ecumenism of blood. In some countries, they kill Christians for wearing a cross or having a Bible. And before they kill them, they do not ask them whether they are Anglicans, Lutherans, Roman Catholics, or Orthodox. Their blood is mixed. To those who kill, we are Christians. They do not ask for your identity card to see which church you were baptized in. We are united in blood. Even though we have not managed to take the necessary step towards unity between us, and perhaps the time has come." End of quote. The above statement portrays the irrelevancy of denominational expressions in Christianity when it comes to the matter of life and death. Pope Francis affirms that, I quote, "To those who kill, we are Christians." End of quote. Their anger to inflict pain, their thirst for blood, and their zeal to persecute and kill the followers of Jesus Christ are based on a deep-seated religious ignorance, toxic social political environment, and the quest for domination and power. This acknowledges the contemporary hostility to Christian faith in various parts of the globe. Put differently, it is an ecumenism forced on the shoulders of Christians. Ecumenism of blood is an offshoot of ecumenical theology. With the numerous Christian traditions and various methods of doing ecumenism, it becomes difficult to have a standardized definition of ecumenical theology. However, for Nicholas Losky, ecumenical theology, I quote, "is a permanent rediscovery of the church as the heart of the world, of creation. It is a renewed awareness of the church's responsibility for all." End of quote. For Mary Turner, ecumenical theology, I quote, "is the result of theological reflection oriented to the goal of unity, the unity of the church, the unity of humankind, and the unity of creation in the perspective of the kingdom of God." End of quote. Despite the variation in definition, scholars agree that creation, humankind, church, unity, responsibility, mutual respect, and dialogue are major concepts enshrined in understanding ecumenical theology. In Africa, ecumenical theology falls under African theologies. Sharma Kaunda depicts African theology as, I quote, "an inclusive discourse that aims to enable African Christians to reclaim African agency, to subvert any imposed category of thinking by rationally taking control, understanding, describing, reshaping, defining, and renaming the world through a neo-indigenous cultural lens, end of quote. Based on the communal nature of African society, the concept of ecumenism is not an imposition from the outside. Africans are ecumenical before the arrival of Christianity. John X. Pobey, of blessed memory, a great ecumenical theologian and an Anglican priest from Ghana, affirms and identifies three types of ecumenism in Africa. Number one is what he called unstructured and natural ecumenism. In my full paper, I critique the use of the word unstructured because that it's more from a westernized way of naming or describing, the gathering of African people that is very, very meaningful. But for the sake of this paper, I remain with his description. So the first is unstructural and natural ecumenism in a multi-religious and multicultural context of nuclear and extended family. In this sense, African people are committed and participated in family rites such as marriage, death, puberty, and many rituals. In such gatherings, religious affiliation and denominational expressions and divides become foreign and unnatural in the position of Africans. And the second form is what Pobey described as enforced ecumenism. It happens based on complex existential reality, such as political oppression. The South African experience during the time of apartheid gives a very good picture of this kind of forced ecumenism that happened during political tension. Wars, natural disaster, persecution, and etc. Force people to come together ecumenically. The third category is what he called structured ecumenism. So it deals with a conscious and unconscious that it is consciously or unconsciously take roots from the 1910 Edinburgh Missionary Conference and other ecumenical initiatives. So these are establishment of national ecumenical body, regional ecumenical body, and global ecumenical body. And so this is what he called structured ecumenism. Now, similarly, structured ecumenism in Africa, you can see conversation around the Bible Society, Christian Medical Association, and many more that you can see in different parts of Africa. One of the strengths of theological reflection on ecumenism in Africa lies in the continual grappling with the colonial, historical, and contemporary social, cultural, economic, and political lived realities across the continent. Therefore, in the word of one of the South African leading theologians, Tihiko Maluleka, he said this, and I quote, African theologians must be good readers of books as well as good readers of their living context, end of quote. Ecumenism of blood in a multicultural context. So because Tiniko have challenged African theologians that we must be good readers of books, good readers of the Bible, but also be good readers of our context. So this kind of challenge, contribute in my reflection in this paper. So now I look at ecumenism of blood in a multicultural context from Nigeria. In Nigeria, various conferences were organized and institutions were established to promote Christian unity, engagement with other religions, and the government. Among them are the first Calabar International Missionary Conference, which was established in 1911. This conference was inspired by the Edinburgh World Mission Conference that took place in 1910. And the second is the establishment of the Christian Council of Nigeria in 1929 and the establishment of the Christian Association of Nigeria in 1976. Additionally, persecution against the follower of Jesus Christ is contributing to uniting Christians in Nigeria. Beyond this, in the country's multicultural and multi-religious context, persecution shows unity outside the boundaries of Christianity based on human shared value of love, justice, peace, and respect. Therefore, Ecumenism of Blood shows unity among Christians and unity beyond the boundaries of Christianity. Now, I will amplify 3 examples from Kaduna State, Nigeria, Kaduna State in northern Nigeria to illustrate the second point. Now, I don't want to talk much on the first point, the unity among Christians, because one of the major arguments I'm bringing in my paper is the unity that comes as a result of Ecumenism of Blood beyond the context of Christian denomination. And I chose Kaduna State because, number one, if you follow the history of northern Nigeria, you will discover that Kaduna used to be the administrative headquarters of northern Nigeria. And number two, you will discover that most of the religious conflicts, that you see or hear, Kaduna has suffered a lot, when it comes to religious conflict. And thirdly, we have seen, in Kaduna State, a kind of a very deep mixture of both Christian and Muslim, living in Kaduna State. So here are my 3 examples to amplify or to illustrate my argument. First is the adoption of 16 members of a church called Bege Baptist Church in Chukum, Kaduna State. Reporting on the release, so the whole idea is that people were in church on a Sunday in a Baptist church, and suddenly some people broke into the church and kidnapped about 16 worshippers in that church. So there were a lot of conversation that happened behind the scene, and finally the people were released. So upon their release, the chairman of the Christian Association of Nigeria, by the name Revd Dr Hayat, he was very gracious when I approached him to do an interview to develop this paper further. He gave me a lot of time to talk and expose me to the different initiatives that were happening in Kaduna State. So I express my appreciation to him even as I present these particular findings. So Hayat made this announcement after the release of the people, and this was what he said. I quote him: "I confirm and give thanks that all 16 are now back home. We are grateful to the Muslim community, which contributed money and bought a motorcycle as part of the ransom required for the release of their Christian brothers and sisters in captivities. This shows good, caring, and sincere neighbors that practically show concern to the plight of their adopted brothers and sisters and their heartfelt wish that they return home to live together in peace and harmony." End of quote. If you pay attention to this quote, to just give a little background also, according to Hayat, when these people were kidnapped, you could hear him say the community rallied around, both Christian and Muslim, contributed money, because one of the requirement for the kidnappers, for these people to be released, is that they need to produce a motorcycle. And if you know the distance from Kaduna to Lagos, by flight it's about 45 minutes. By road, you're talking almost about 13 to 16 hours by road. And to get this motorcycle, you have to travel from Kaduna to Lagos to get the motorcycle. According to the testimony, some of the Muslim community, they did not only contribute, some of them volunteered to accompany Christian to travel to Lagos to buy this motorcycle to come and give as part of the ransom. Now, and if you hear Hayat's use of language, you could see the use of language of solidarity, where Hayat was he talked about neighbors, he talked about love, he talked about brothers and sisters, and you could see how that resonates so deeply with the concept of human dignity, with the concept of neighbor love, and with the concept of shared humanity. So this is one story, one lived realities in connection to Ecumenism of Blood. And the second one, still in Kaduna State, is the signing of the Kaduna Peace Declaration of Religious Leader in 2002. Why is this important? Because if you pay attention to the Nigerian religious environment, you will discover that it was in 2002 that we started hearing so much and the heat that Boko Haram was bringing. If you read a lot about Boko Haram, you will see that it was in 2002 that Boko Haram was really unleashing terror in different parts of the northern state of Nigeria. In that 2002, religious leaders in Kaduna State, which was very unique, came together, thousands of them came together and come up with what is called the Kaduna Peace Declaration of Religious Leaders. And the religious communities have different leaders that signed this peace declaration. So I have given you a background to say the Boko Haram stuff mostly came into limelight in 2002. And then the second very important incident that happened in 2002 that makes this document very unique is that if you pay attention, in 2001, a Nigerian lady called Agbani Derigo won the Miss World Beauty Pageant. And in 2002, Nigeria was to host that beauty pageant. And part of the itinerary of these beautiful queens, or whatever you call them, sisters that came from different parts of the world into Nigeria, was to travel to different parts of Nigeria to experience our culture, to experience different things. When they were to come to the north in 2002, the north was deeply heated religiously. One, because of how the ladies were dressed. So there was so much religious rhetorics and conversation, both from Christian and Muslim, in condemnation and saying these ladies should not come to the northern part of Nigeria and things like that. And then there was this journalist, I think this day, if I'm not mistaken, but if I mistake, if I don't get that, if it is not this day, maybe some of the Nigerian participants will correct me in that. But there's this Nigerian journalist, I think from this day newspaper, wrote a piece during the heat of that conversation. And she said that if the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is alive to see these beautiful sisters, he might have chosen some of them to be his wife. Now, that comment brought a lot of killings in Kaduna State and the destruction of properties in the state. I can tell you that part of the thing that brought the calmness was this declaration of peace that the religious leaders signed in Kaduna State. Now, here are some of the words from this declaration. I quote some of the words from this declaration. It says, "We who have gathered as Muslims and Christians religious leaders from Kaduna State to pray for peace in our state and declare our commitment to ending the violence and bloodshed. The violence and bloodshed which have marred our recent history. According to our faith, killing innocent people in the name of God is desecration of his holy name and defame religion in the world. Religious violence is an evil that all people of God must oppose. We seek to live together as neighbors." You still hear the word neighbors come into play. We seek to live together as neighbors, respecting the integrity of each other's historical and religious heritage. All tribes must respect the divinely ordained purpose of the Creator by whose grace we live together. Such ordained purpose include freedom of worship, access to and sanctity of place of worship, and justice for all. So you hear from the declaration, the few things I've quoted from the declaration, you still hear how it resonates with this concept of human dignity, this concept of neighbor love, this idea of unity that comes beyond Christian boundaries, unity that it is within Christian boundaries, but unity that also go beyond Christian boundary. Helen, can you please project a picture for me as I give this last point? So the last point that I want to use in explaining this is the story of profound unity, resilience, and peace building of Reverend Dr. James Muel Uye and Imam Dr. Mohammed Naru Ashafa, founder of Interfaith Mediation Center and the inaugural Commonwealth Peace Prize winners. These leaders used to be religious extremists and fierce enemies looking for a way to kill each other. Now, if you look at the picture very well, I like this picture a lot. I like using it a lot. If you look at this picture, you look at the Reverend. You look at the Reverend, you will discover that one of the hand of the Reverend is not showing. And the reason is because in one of the religious attack that this guy was going out to kill Muslims in Kaduna State, his wrist was amputated. So his wrist was amputated. And the Imam also lost some members of his family. Some of them died as a result of religious killings in Kaduna State. These men were fierce enemy. I was privileged to hear them speak. They said they were busy looking for a way to kill each other. But 30 years ago, they decided to come together to work, come together as a result of the pain of a lot of Christians that were killed, as a result of the pain of a lot of Muslims that were killed. I mean, take a very good look at their smile. Take a very good look at the smile of these brothers. And with the kind of work they are doing, they were recognized in different parts of the world. And this year, Commonwealth recognized them and made them the inaugural winners of the Commonwealth Peace Prize. So this is a story coming from Kaduna State. Their center is in Kaduna, and the kind of work they do is in Kaduna. Think about the kind of life, the kind of war, the kind of world that we will live in with this kind of smile between Christians and Muslims, not only within Kaduna State, but also as you project it in other parts of the world. The above expressions focuses attention on the fact that Muslims and Christians have many things in common as human beings. They understand the sanctity of life, live in the same world, and in the same country beset with social, economic, and political problems in need of solution. Also, their experiences amplify concept of human dignity, natural ecumenism, and neighbor love as part of peace building, reconciliation, and healing process that resists future persecution in the name of religion. Therefore, in a multicultural, multi-religious context, ecumenism of blood shows unity among Christians and unity beyond Christianity. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to the conversation that will ensue from this presentation. Thank you. Over to you, Peniel.
Ishaya, thank you so very much for those powerful words, reminding us of how ecumenism of blood can help us to not only work together across religious boundaries, but also be true neighbors to each other.